Alright, you bastards, this is Some-Belgian-prepper, and today we're going to talk about the uses of old newspapers. Because newspapers, you see in disaster movies, always so many newspapers blowing around the city after a disaster. But actually, those newspapers could be a very valuable source of how do you say this, in your survival and your survival strategy. So I'm going to name a long number of a lot of ways you can use old newspapers that you probably not have thought about, or other ways that you can improvise or replace to save some money. So we're going to do just that. But before that, if you're interested into a detective series, I wrote first part of an 11-part series. If you're, it's called Bloody Crosses. It's in Dutch. If you're interested, look down in the description. And yeah, let's get on with the video. So here we go. There we go. You see? Oh. Yeah. It is a newspaper could be used to make tinder with something like a fire steel like this, fire steel rod. But the problem is, if you just do it like this, you will get too little material to ignite the tinder. So what I do is I use a knife, I scrape a little bit of it to keep in the newspaper. I put it a little bit together so there is more material and air together with it, and then you just need one spark to ignite it like you just saw. So yeah, that's all. Old newspaper could be used as a form of tinder. I once made a video about sleeping during a bug out in an abandoned building, and if you find an old newspaper there, you can use it as insulation to put beneath you for the bed. So it's very important. If you, I would say, take the page by page out, and then you try to do it like this. You press everything together, so that way if it's just flat, it will absorb moist more and will not isolate and insulate that good. But if you do it like this, you have more oxygen between the parts, you have more spaces between it, so that's better to keep your body from losing heat to the cold underground. So with one newspaper you can make a whole bed in this manner, and it's way better than nothing actually. So yeah, old newspaper like this, used like this to keep you from the cold underground, so you do not lose your body heat too much. I once made a video on how to recycle materials and at home for so you can reuse them instead of throwing them away. And one of those was to make fuel bricks. You can do this with old newspapers. What you do is you take old paper, carton, or newspapers like this, and you put them in a bucket with water, and you let them soak in till they are turned into paper mache. And that way you stir it a little bit, and then you put it into a bucket where there are holes in it. So what happens is the paper mache, all the water will leak out through the holes, preferably into another container, so you do not contaminate the ground. And that way you get dry. You can let them dry, and that's our paper mache will turn into fuel bricks that you can use to use in a wood stove. Be carefully, because the smoke could be a little bit dangerous because of the ink, which can be a little bit toxic, and also it will give a little bit more smoke than usual things. But it's a way to recycle materials and for heat, so you can cook, boil water, and so on, or perhaps even for using it to warm up your house if you have a wood stove inside of your house. That's also a way you can use it. Look into my video on how to recycle materials. There is an example on how I do this. So I talked about paper mache. If you're in a survival situation where professional medical help is not around, and you have a broken arm or a broken leg, sometimes you need a cast to immobilize the leg. And if you can make your own paper mache, you can use perhaps some chicken wire, and then you put paper mache around the leg, let it dry, and that way you have material around around and through the chicken wire to immobilize the arm, like a modern cast, but improvised in a way. Talking about cast, another way to immobilize perhaps a body part like a limb, like an arm or leg. If you have to transport that person and you do not want to make more damage to the fracture than there is, you can take a newspaper, perhaps a few more like this, and then you can put it around, and you that way you can immobilize it a little bit. It gives a little bit space so it can move, so it's not too sturdy, but also it's sturdy enough that it will keep everything in its place. So a few tapes around this, a few cordages, and that way you can and immobilize it. Use a chamois to carry it, but a newspaper can be used to immobilize the body part with a fracture. So if you keep newspapers and entertainment could be a problem during a survival situation. Like imagine there is social unrest. There is a bug. You are into a bug incident scenario. Well, new entertainment could be hard to get, at least. So like perhaps there is no internet, no television, like during a wartime, or new newspapers are not available, or magazines, or you do not have the money for it. You can get papers from other persons who have done reading them, and yeah, for the children perhaps you can there are puzzles they can solve, coloring things to color them. There are crossword puzzles for the adults, Sudoku. Sometimes there are little comics in it, and sometimes even reading some how do you say this, trivia knowledge things, not like actual news, but the trivial things that perhaps science discovers. Such articles could still be a form of entertainment if you have even an old newspaper. Another thing you can use newspapers for is as wrapping, but wrapping for perhaps for if you give a gift and real gift wrapping paper is too expensive, or it's not really worth it for a simple occasion. You can just pack the gift into some newspapers. The same thing goes if you want to transport fragile goods. So if you have a box with perhaps some glasses or something that could easily break, put something like this. It's like earlier with the bedding. Put this in the sides, beneath it, above it, and if the box tilts or falls from a low height, then there is less chance that it will be broken. And if you transport it like in a car or a bike, it will not rattle around and perhaps break the certain object, the breakable object inside of the box. Another use is actually decoration. Yeah, if you have children, what you can do is you can not only take the newspapers and snip figures out, like those slings that you can put around the Christmas tree, but if you find some articles with colorful pictures or certain landscapes, you can cut them out and make something like a little painting out of it. Like, you know how those criminals send ransom letters with only the letters from the papers. You can do the same thing with pictures to make something more nice and something fun for the children to do without something that will cost a lot of money. So yeah, pleasure ensured. If you are on a bug out and it's really cold, there was a thing that the German army actually did, and that was old newspapers as insulation for the clothing. So they took the papers and between layers of clothing, not against the skin, because the skin can sweat and get it damp and wet and it will stick to you. But imagine if you have a coat around here, you can put it inside of the arms, on top of the body body part, close the jacket, and then you have an extra insulating layer inside of clothing. So that could be handy during a bug out where you can find some trash and you find an old newspaper, and if you are really cold and you do not want to suffer hypothermia, you can use old newspapers as a sort of insulation inside of your clothing between layers. So this is another use you can do with old newspapers, and that is to preserve vegetables or potatoes. You put them into a bucket, and usually the moist will vaporize, but sometimes it will go back down, and that's bad for storage of vegetables. So as you can see, I use this newspaper and some other like similar materials, so that the moist will be taken out as much as possible and out of the vegetables, and that way they will stay fresher for a longer time. So if it's winter and it's getting really cold, you can use old newspapers to insulate the place even more, but watch out that you do not isolate it so much that CO2 cannot escape and you have monoxide poisoning. So there are certain things you can take newspapers and you can get them against windows so that the heat will not reach the cold breach of the glass that will take the cold from outside to the inside. So that's one way you can insulate your house. The same thing goes to you can wrap this around piping that cannot get too cold, like water pipes, and perhaps during winter time it can start to freeze inside of the pipes, and you can prevent it a little bit by putting some newspapers around it so it will be less affected by the cold. And one of the last things you can do is take a newspaper and shove it beneath how do I say this, the little open space beneath the door, so that way the wind from beneath this cannot leave it. But yet again, watch out that you do not plug it up too much that CO2 cannot escape from the lower level and get collected inside of the certain room you want to insulate. Another way that newspapers are being used as a form of pots for seeding. So what you do is you can roll up a newspaper like this. You close off this with another piece of newspaper. You put some dirt in it with seeds. You can store it somewhere there where the seed can grow. And from the moment it starts to grow, you can go plant it into your garden for so that you do not need to sow in certain grounds. And yeah, the problem could sometimes be that it will not sprout. And that way you can use sprouts, plants, seeds, or to use in your garden for a more effective harvest. And something that newspapers has been used for a very, very long time as improvised toilet paper. Yeah, it's biodegradable, but watch out that you do not. Sometimes newspapers can contain toxins, so if you use that in a certain septic, like a septic pit, and you use it to fertilize your gardening, be careful that ink some types of ink can contain toxins. So in large amounts of quantities, it can form some problems in the future. But as a solution for a short-term period, yeah, go ahead, use a newspaper as a form of improvised toilet paper. So what they did around the 50s and often even more before that is they used diapers that were made out of cloth, but to help it absorb, so there is so it would less chance that it would leak through. They folded up newspapers don't put it in like this, because this will not really absorb that much, but put it in layers where there is some room with it, and then if there is some moist, then it can be a little bit better barrier, that it will not leak that much, so you have time to clean the baby, and there is less mess that you have to wash and clean afterwards, so that you can throw this away into a sort of compost heap. So that's also a use of old newspapers. So if your shoes are wet from a long hike or from stepping into the rain, you use a newspaper and shove it inside of your shoe, and that way it will suck out the moist from the surface. You can take when it's fully wet, you can take it out, put a new one in, and keep doing that, and then your shoes will dry faster that way. Another simple use for old newspapers is just as a way to work cleanly at for certain chores or reparations. So imagine if you you just want to cut some potatoes or some vegetables, and you don't want to clean up the table every time, just do it on an open newspaper. The same thing goes if you are trying to make or repair something that could have some dirt in it, some oil. Put it on the work area, and that way you will have less of a mess on top of the area. The same way, a newspaper can be used to obstruct view. So if you have a certain building with a glass window, and perhaps you have some repairs going on, but you do not want people to look inside. So like the storm plates, you cannot close them. The shutters, the roll shutters, you cannot pull them down. Curtains are perhaps in the laundry, but you don't want people to look inside of your house that are passing by. So just like in the movies with the criminals, just tape it against the glass and nobody can look inside. The same thing applies for a long-term survival situation. If you do not want to draw attention, you can darken the outside of your you can prevent that people notice light in the night if you put some newspapers in front of it, and you will be less be noticed or be attracted by criminals who are looking for people who are still in the area perhaps, or to know so that they don't know that you're in that certain room. So that's also a use for it. And as a way to clean is also a useful item for the newspapers. So if you have an oil spill, if your dog has some really bad diarrhea, or perhaps you have some food dropped on the floor, and you do not want to use a towel to wash it later on because you have to clean one nasty spot, and then you have to wash it again. With a newspaper, you can clean most of it and throw it away into the garbage or into a compost heap. But be careful with the toxins from the ink. But yeah, that's a good way and cheap alternative to wipe things clean that are otherwise would be a hassle. So one of those ways to reuse newspapers is as improvised body armor, and I used my 22 air rifle, which is 7.5 joules, which is just above the legal requirements to acquire that you need a gun permit. So that is just the minimum that you could face with weapons and bullets. So what I did is a test with the thickness of a newspaper, and yeah, I noticed I used 3 just regular newspapers behind each other. It went straight through. So I folded them in 2. So you got actually the thickness of 6 full newspapers, and that is these are the results of the test firing. So what do we see? The thing is, 1 did not got through, 2 went through, and 1 got out of the back, but they was relative little damage and fell out of it. It was not stuck in the target behind it. So yeah, it's not really that spectacular. How do you say this? It's not. You will get hurt if you use this as improvised body armor, but you will have less chance for deeper penetration or damage, because that is one of those pellets that got into the target behind it, but it was not that deep. It was just stuck on the just a few millimeters deep inside. It was stuck. So yeah, the results are kind of mixed, but I would say it's better than nothing if you're gonna use newspapers, folded up newspapers as a form of improvised body armor. So what you can do is you fold. There is a shooting around. You can fold those up, and you can try to keep it somewhere to protect your vital organs, because there's no use to put it onto your arms. It will take too much time, and it will be a little bit not handy to walk around with it. So I would say fold them up and keep them in front of your vital organs. So if you get shot or hit, the impact damage, the penetration will be less than without. what you perhaps can a better use for this is perhaps with against knife attacks. Yet again, there is a possibility to wrap newspapers around your arms with tape, and if somebody wants to attack you with a knife and they try to cut, then the newspaper around will give some protection against the first cuts, and then you have time to retaliate to neutralize the threat that is trying to cut you. The same thing goes again for the protection of the vital organs. If somebody tries to stab you and you have a few folded newspapers are in front of the vital organs, a knife will be less likely to penetrate, unless it's a really really sharp knife that is smooth enough to get through it, or with enough force. But most knives are just normal knives would give you a chance to fight back, and in case you get hit, be less damage in the first impact. So yeah, that's one way to reuse a newspaper. This is a newspaper could also be used as an improvised weapon. If you roll it up to a firm part, you can put something like a nail through it or something like that. Then you can try to hit your opponent with it with some force, like a little bat. Yeah, that could be turned into not lethal, but a certain weapon to deter an aggressor like your kidnapper, so you can have time to get away. Or if you're in some sort of a prison, a very bad prison, you need to defend yourself. These are just a few things you can imagine, try to make up with your fantasy and creativity to develop weapons for self-defense. So I think I'm ready now with how do you say this, with the video, and I hope you learned something from new ways to reuse materials like old newspapers for survival, and not only survival situations but also for everyday tasks to say. So yeah, that could be save some money for if you're in financial trouble. Subscribe, like. If you have any other uses for newspapers beside the one that I said, please let me know. I'm always eager to learn new ways, tips, hacks. So I would really appreciate it. So thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Cheers.